This story was told to me by a friend who lives in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. It concerns the haunting of a graveyard in a very rural location. I'm originally from a neighboring county, and I lived in Florida for the last 26 years and met this friend while on vacation at Daytona Beach 6 years ago. And after discovering that we knew a lot of the same people and landmarks, a discussion came up about this graveyard. It is a very old cemetery with headstones way back to the mid 1800s. I went there with a friend several years back on a trip back to my hometown, and most of the graves are from the Stockholm family from that era in Cushing County. It is located very far from any civilization in an extremely remote part of the county, and has been used as a party place for darling youths, as the story or legend is widespread among the youth, as well as the oldsters that I talk to. I talk with many people my age, baby boomers, my parents' age, my grandparents' age, present teens, and younger, and got the same general story. It centers around the supposed execution of a woman named Mary Stockholm for practicing witchcraft in the late 1800s in Cushing County. She was supposedly beheaded and buried at the location, with her head and torso in separate graves, and she is seen at the witching hour, looking for her head. This is the main theme of the story, although there is a plethora of individual stories of chilling proportions from my friends' experiences and many other people I talk to. Now, the people I talked to would swear on any polygraph machine that what they told me was true, but the ironic thing is that a similar story from my home county is around about a warlock that was executed around the same period of time and is buried in a remote cemetery in Cushing County that I've also visited, also decapitated with some burial and looking for his head at midnight. Coincidence or the real deal? I'm not sure. I'm a 43-year-old Caucasian male, married over 12 years, and I have 2 children. I have a college degree, work as a professional, and have no particular religious beliefs. My only experience with ghosts or entities, I don't know what the heck it was, happened to me over a period of about 10 months while living in New Hampshire, about 3 years ago. I'd purchased a large, 2-story, 10-bedroom farmhouse which needed extensive repair. Before we moved in, each night after I got off of work, I would spend several hours painting, wallpapering, and performing the needed repairs. My first experience was this. I was painting in a closet. There was no one else in the building. I was just doing my thing when I heard one distinct bong. It was the exact same sound that an older mantel clock would make. Like most people, I know what it sounds like when I hear song refrains running through my mind, as generated by my mind. I've also experienced a dead ear, where one ear will suddenly go deaf with a loud ringing sound, which fades away after a few minutes. These sounds are eternal, again, generated by my mind, and are familiar to me. This bong was external, it was not generated by my mind. I knew that the house was completely empty of furniture. I'd carted all the rubbish to the dump myself. I continued to paint and soon after, ended my night's work at the house. The next evening, I was again painting in a closet when I heard what could be best described as an old-fashioned electric doorbell, the kind with a hammer that quickly strikes at the bell continuously until the button is released. I looked at my watch. It was 1 o'clock again. I put down my brush, stood up, and made a thorough search of the house for the doorbells. I'd never looked for a doorbell until this point. I also searched the basement around the furnace, thinking it might have been an alarm bell or some such. But my search turned up neither bells, wires, or any front or back doorbell buttons on the house. I heard nothing more that evening. About 3 weeks later, I moved my family into the house. About a month after moving in, my son, who was about 3 at the time, told us at breakfast that a woman was in his room the night before. What kind of woman, I asked, and he went on to tell us, with his limited vocabulary, that a woman with white clothes came in and sat on his bed. I asked if she looked like Mommy, and he said no. I asked if she talked to him, and he said no. She just sat there. I asked if she walked in or walked out, but he told us that she just sat on the bed. My wife and I looked back and forth at each other, and then at her son, who continued to eat his breakfast. He wasn't upset or disturbed, and we simply moved on to the business of the day. He never mentioned any other visit again. Today, At 6 years old, he says he does remember the woman, but can offer very little about her. About a week after this, my wife confronted me when I came home from work and told me that all afternoon she heard the continuous rattle of dishes being moved about in the kitchen while she was either upstairs or at the other side of the house. She also heard the cupboard's door slamming shut, hard. She told me that she would go to the kitchen to see what was going on, but would find nothing out of the ordinary. In all the time we lived in the house, I never heard the dishes or cupboard doors. Over the next month or so, my wife told me that she would also hear various doors in the house slamming, but again, when she went to see or walk through the house, the doors were as they had been. I'd taken pains to insulate against the New Hampshire winter cold and wind. This house was not drafty. We had candles lit on many winter nights, and never saw them so much as flicker. My last personal experience in the house was the most dramatic. My wife had taken the children shopping and had been gone for about an hour or two. It was a Saturday afternoon. I grabbed a book next and laid down on top of my bed to read a few chapters. After a bit of time, I heard the door at the bottom of the stairs open, doorknob rattle, a bit of hinge work, and heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Our bedroom was at the top of the stairs, and I could see the landing from my bed. As I heard the first few steps, I thought to myself that my wife must have been home, but I knew that I hadn't heard the car entering the yard, car door slamming, kids talking, etc. All the normal sounds of my family's arrival from a shopping trip. I dropped the book flat onto my chest and looked over my feet towards the bedroom door and stared at the top landing space, all the while footsteps continued to climb the stairs. Clump, 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 to all have been the top, but nothing. I got up and went to the landing. Nothing. I went straight down and through the house, to the kitchen. I looked out to our driveway. Just my car sat there. I made some coffee, went back to my room, and about an hour later, my wife and kids returned home. I told her my story, as I've just told you. I had no personal experiences with this sort of thing in this house, nor at any time before or since. We moved away about a year later to Florida. We moved for the weather, the financial opportunities, to be closer to other family members, but not because of any hauntings or the bizarre. The farmhouse we lived in still stands and is well known in the town we lived in, and it continues to be known locally as the Sheaver Farm, and is located on the Sheaver Road in Dorchester, New Hampshire, about 20 minutes west of Plymouth, New Hampshire. I've lived in my house since I was born, 34 years ago. When I was about 5 years old, I was sleeping in my grandmother's couch upstairs when I kept being awakened by the sound of heavy footsteps going up and down the stairs loudly. I was really scared, but when I reached for the door handle to have a look, the sound stopped, and afterwards, I was too scared to try having another look, so I just listened until falling asleep. When I was 8, my mother and older foster sister were returning home one night from seeing the Exorcist movie at the movie theater when things got really out of hand. My younger sister and I shared a bedroom, and her brother had the room to the other side of the wall, at our heads. We frequently played games of knocking and code, and this night, we didn't want to play, so we didn't knock back. Sometime after the knocking began, we heard my brother call to my foster sister and tell her to have us stop knocking. He was tired and wanted to go to sleep. My sister and I said, "What?" When she came in to tell us to stop, we told her that we were not knocking and that we thought it was him, and we were tired and wanted to go to sleep. She almost believed us and went back to the kitchen with my mom. The knocking continued, and my sister and I called up to my foster sister to have my brother stop knocking. When she went to tell him, he was sound asleep. We told her that he wasn't sleeping, that he was knocking, and she insisted he was really asleep. The knocking occurred in rhythms, as if it was some kind of Indian drum kind of tapping. It even got louder and faster and moved to different walls in the room and to the ceiling. My older foster sister and my aunt Each slept in me and my sister's beds until we fell asleep. We were so scared listening to the Indian drums, we wanted to run out of the room, but they made us stay there and lay in the bed and listen to it until we fell asleep. After we fell asleep, they got up and went back to the kitchen, probably to discuss the events, when we woke back up to the same noises. Finally, they put a mattress in the middle of the floor in the living room, and we all slept there together for the entire night. If you know when The Exorcist was in the movie theater, you know that was a really long time ago, and we haven't had any Indian drums since then, but I've heard of 2 other houses on my street who had the same noises in them. Me and a lot of my friends have a lot of different kinds of encounters with ghosts in my house over the years. This story is true, and this house really is haunted. Let me start off by saying, I never met my real father. He died when I was a baby. Anyhow, I've always known about my deceased father. His name was Jerry. Now, no one in my family talks about my deceased dad, and we don't know anyone by the name of Jerry. One day, when I was between the ages of 8 and 9, my cousin, my mother, and myself were down the stairs in the basement singing. The phone began to ring, and even though we had a phone in the basement, I went upstairs one flight to our library to answer the phone, so as to not disturb my mother's song. When I answered the phone, I noticed immediately the static on the line, and I knew it wasn't our phone, so I asked the caller to speak louder. Now, from here on out, it gets weird. The caller asked to speak to RE7, my mom's nickname. I then asked who was calling, and the caller replied Jerry. I immediately knew my mother knew of no other Jerry, so I repeated the name, and the caller acknowledged that that was his name. I tell him to hold on. I run down the stairs to where my mother and cousin were, and tell my mother to pick up the phone, that she had a phone call, and that the caller's name was Jerry. My cousin looked up shocked, as did my mother, and simultaneously said Jerry. This all happening within a minute or so. So, my mother picks up the phone and answers the call, only there is no one on the line now. I run back upstairs to the library to hang up the phone, and I go back to the basement, and both my mother and my cousin are trying to figure out if I got the name right. I assure them I did, and tell them about the connection and the static. We all just kind of dismissed the call. Only later, when I started thinking about it, did I realize that my father never knew me and died very tragically when he was struck by a car. I think he wanted to hear my voice and hear my mother's voice. What I didn't tell my mother or my cousin is that the caller addressed me by my name. I never told the caller my name, but he knew my name, Tamaya. Hi, I've sent info before, but I'm using a friend's computer today since the battery in my car is dead. Nothing to do with ghosts, I don't think. Anyway, having read about people seeing black figures, I thought I would add my 2 cents. The first time, I was 16, living in LA with my grandparents, who were out of town at the time. I wasn't drinking, just alone. When I left my bedroom, crossed the hall into the kitchen, when a figure stepped out in front of me. I saw the legs and arms, kind of like that famous Bigfoot photo. It was creepy. I got a baseball bat and turned on all the lights in the house and called a friend. Nothing else. Then, just less than 2 years ago, I had since moved to Quarles, New Hampshire. I was living with another woman. I got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. As I came out, through the door, there was another shadow being right in front of me. I saw its head and shoulders, taller than me. I put my hands up, as if to gesture excuse me, or not to run it over. Since then, here in Quarles, I felt things in the corners, rushing around the room and such. I bought my own house in July 1999, and my dog barked incredibly at one particular corner. My roommate at the time immediately burned sage, and he stopped. What are these things? I've not seen anything in my place, and the dogs haven't acted weird since. Someone did say that I've been dimension jumping. Have you heard of this? At one time, I never believed in ghosts or spirits or anything that is supernatural. That is until I went over to my friend Sarah's house. It all started back in '96. I'd been friends with Sarah all my life, which would have been 15 years then, and she had told me about her house. Being the skeptic that I was, I would laugh at her and call her crazy. I never went over to her house much, and when I did, it was only for a short amount of time. Well, during the summer of '96, I started staying the night with her about every weekend. I noticed when I first went into her living room, it was very cold in one particular spot, right in front of the stairway. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and my arm and leg on the right side got goosebumps on them. My friend Sarah and her fiance saw them too. My second experience was about a week later. Me and Sarah decided to call it a night. She slept on the couch at that time because her waterbed mattress had a hole in it. So, she pulled out a twin-size mattress for me to sleep on. Well, the mattress was facing the stairway, which had a sheet over it, because Sarah said it felt like someone was staring at her from the top step when she would try and sleep. Anyways, as I laid there, I looked over at the sheet, and all of a sudden, it pushed out in the middle. Well, at first I thought it was just a draft or something, so I sat there and watched it, and it did it again, but this time, it shot out even further in the middle. I sat there and waited to see if it would do it again, but it didn't. My second experience happened 2 weekends later. Me, Sarah, and her fiance at the time were the only ones home. Sarah and her fiance decided to take a shower, and I was still tired from staying up late the night before that I decided to take a nap while they were showering. I was almost asleep when I heard the squeak and then a bang of, well, like a cabinet door. Thinking it was Sarah and Jake, I sat up and walked into the kitchen, and I heard it again. So, I walked back to the bathroom and asked if either of them were out of the shower. They said no, that neither of them had gotten out at all. When I got back to the living room, I heard it again, and I knew where it was coming from then. Upstairs, in the attic part of the house. You see, the upstairs of this house is made weird. The attic and the room upstairs are one big room, with a wall cutting it in two. Well, the door in the attic is a very small square door that they always keep locked because a bat or two has been known to get into the house. Anyways, when I got upstairs, I saw the door closing with my own eyes. Needless to say, I did freak a little. Well, Jake and Sarah got out of the shower, come into the living room, and see that I am white as a sheet. I tell them, and my friend goes and checks it out and says, "You won't believe this when I tell you." I said, "What?" And she said, "The door is locked. The door has a bolt lock on it that slides side to side." My third experience turned me into a believer. Me and Sarah were the only two there, besides a dog, who was asleep at Sarah's feet. We were talking, and all of a sudden, we heard a pop can getting knocked around under the couch. We got a little nervous, and then, to our relief, a mouse darted out from underneath the couch. We started laughing, and I made a comment about a big old mouse must be what causes the noises we hear, etc. Next thing we know, we hear these footsteps, loud footsteps, going from my friend's parents' bedroom to her brother's bedroom, at the back of the cabin. It sounded like someone had work boots on, and was just stomping on purpose. Well, my friend looks at me and says, "Now that is one big frickin' rat." I said, "Let's go outside." Thank you for letting me share this few experiences that I have encountered. What I told you is just the beginning. If you'd like to hear more, just let me know. When I was 12, my family moved to a newer house about 10 minutes away from where I grew up. The house was 7 years old and no one had ever died there. From the start, I would hear footsteps in the carpeting and I always felt that I was being watched. especially when I played our piano. That was the extent of my experiences until I was in my early 20s. One evening, my sister and I were sitting in the den talking. It was spring, and the temperature was perfect, so all the windows were closed and the air was off. Suddenly, in the back of the room, there were a lot of plants sitting together. One plant in the middle started shaking furiously. My sister and I looked at each other and went into the other room. A few weeks later, my mother and I were sitting alone in the house when it sounded like someone very roughly racked fingernails down a couch in the back of the room, which was in sight, and again, a plant that was sitting at the end of the couch started shaking furiously. My mother just would not admit that we were being visited, even though she'd witnessed it firsthand. The last thing anything paranormal happened was on a Friday afternoon. I was in my mother's room, talking to her, when I noticed the atmosphere had seemed to have grown heavy, and I got chills. As the afternoon wore on, the feeling increased until I couldn't stand to go into the room any longer. That evening, my sister and I were alone and watching TV. I'd gone to the fridge for a snack and felt the heaviness with the goosebumps on the left side of it. I told my sister that the ghost was in the kitchen. I could feel it. A few minutes later, a picture that was hanging in the kitchen fell off of the wall. When we got the nerve up, my sister and I went around to another door in the kitchen on the opposite side of the room. We walked in and stood there, seeing and feeling nothing. Suddenly, the hair on our arms literally stood up, and we had to run out. Immediately afterwards, it left and hasn't been back. I don't even feel like I'm being watched while playing the piano. I guess whatever it was only wanted to communicate, but I was too frightened. I felt the heaviness with chills in other places, but until the last few years, I hadn't seen any entities. I've moved twice, and really don't believe the houses were haunted, but intermittently, and for short periods of time, I believe there were entities present. I've seen a man with long salt and pepper hair, with a dark cloak, looking at me with bright, colorless eyes. It looked like a negative of a photo. Also, I've seen a bright, elongated white shape out of the corner of my eye around my bed several times. The most profound experience I've ever had was when I was visited by a spirit of a friend who had died a week before his 16th birthday. Almost 10 years later, I started having dreams with him there, and I would wake up with the most wonderful feeling of being loved. During one of those dreams, I was at home alone during the day, and I had to sleep because I was working nights. It was a little warm, but not enough for the air. I had 2 blankets on my bed and threw one in the floor, and the other one was a mess because I had been tossing and turning. I finally made it back to sleep and dreamed of my friend. I got too hot and woke up to find the blanket I tossed on the floor laid over me very neatly. I've had too many experiences to discount anything to just chance, and my mother is finally admitting that she has experienced the paranormal. I live in Tucson, Arizona. Shortly north of the city lies Mount Lemmon. This peak is a great pine-forested, 7,000-foot getaway from the desert city. I had my brother and 2 friends over at my place at about 1 a.m. a few months ago, and after a few hours of boredom, we decided to go up to Mount Lemmon and enjoy some nice cool night air. I would often take the 45-minute trip to wind down and watch the stars, so this is a very familiar place. The trip started off very normal. Our first stop was without occurrences. The next stop, I became mildly aware of a presence. This is nothing new to me, however, so I ignored it. By the 3rd stop, we got out again. My brother and our friend Steve stayed in the car, and my friend Thea and I went for a walk. After a short discussion about friend trouble, she interrupted and said she kept seeing a shadowed figure from the top of a nearby peak. I told her that something was watching us, but not to worry, because I didn't sense hostility. We started to walk back and kept hearing the sound of scattering gravel and an extra set of footsteps on the other side of me. This was at first amusing because we knew at this time we had gained a friend that was not from around here. By the time we got to the car, Thea panicked, and when we got in, My brother Steve spoke of shadow figures they saw. We smiled, started the car, and drove down the mountain. As we spoke about what we saw and felt and heard, it was decided we would stop again. We pulled off at a scenic view of a canyon area, where we found a newer model Ford Bronco with the engine idling, the dome light on, and no one in or around the vehicle. This was unsettling, but could surely be explained, no matter how far-fetched the explanation. We stayed here for about 10 minutes. After the first couple of minutes, my brother and I simultaneously noticed a large dark mass above the peak we were being watched earlier from. Thea saw shadow figures on the top of the peak. I could see the mass disappear, as if moving down the mountain towards us. Thea said the figures were walking down the mountainside. No one was scared at this point. We were all very amused. When I could no longer see the mass, I was only able to see above the mountain because the sky posed as a backdrop. We all got a wave of panic. Gravel started swirling around everywhere, and Thea and Jason ran for the car. I was stunned, so I was the last to get there. Jason entered the car from the other side, but this heavy trench coat was flipped over his head as he opened the door. We started the car and sped down the mountain. We spoke with Steve about what we saw. He saw the same shadow figures Thea had seen. We pulled over one last time without getting out of the car to show Steve the big black mass that was causing all the commotion. We then kept driving until we reached the city again. The whole way down, seeing cars pulled off to the side, some with dome lights on, never with anyone in or around them. This is very odd for 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Furthermore, vehicles are not allowed to park on the road after 10 p.m. The next night, Thea and I returned. We never got out of the car this time. However, every time we cut the engine and all the power, we hear scratching underneath the car, and eventually, it would start to rock. We pulled over 4 times. This happened every time. Finally, the 5th time, we decided to get out of the car before that happened, so we would have enough guts to see what else would happen. Once again, we didn't make it. We opened the doors and pointed our flashlights outside, and as soon as we did, gravel started swirling around, louder than before. There was no wind, and we watched it jump around as if someone was kicking it right in front of us. After this trip, it turned out that the brakes in front of the left of the car, where we heard the scratching from when the car was off, were worn down badly. However, the rest of the brakes were fine. We stumped the mechanic, but once again, this is something that may be explained. I just don't know how. I'm planning a return trip, well equipped now. I will bring a camera, several flashlights, and a video recorder. Depending on the outcome of this trip, I will forward any eventful images to your site. I am stuck wondering 2 things now. First off, what is this entity? There are no local legends that I've found yet about Mount Lemon. Second off, will there be again when I visit next week something? I certainly hope so. There is much more I would like to learn before it becomes just a memory. If anyone has any suggestions about this incident or what it could be, please email me. I'd love to know. Well guys, you were just treated to a little longer of a video than my normal 20-minute videos, and for that, go ahead and share this wherever you can. No matter the sky, no matter the limit, we are going to share this to get the 10K and celebrate and drink drinks of drinks and drinks of drinks of drinks so you guys can hug forever and we can party until it's all night long, just like Lionel Richie, Party All Night Long. That song. If you know that song, I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Guys, thank you so much. And it's Wednesday. What a typical Wednesday it is. No, but guys, seriously, I'm just so thankful that I can get a video out that's pretty lengthy, usually more than my usual videos. So thank you so much for participating in this watching marathon. Well, it's not really a marathon, but you guys know what I mean. Anyway, do your best guys to share this video around, like it, comment if you will, but really, it's nice to get back to what I usually do, and that's the non-Reddit true scary stories. I know you guys were probably thinking, oh man, not this video, not a Reddit read, but a lot of people did still want that, so I was thinking of you guys in the end anyway. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I know it didn't really do well compared to this stuff because, you know, this is my baby. These are my baby videos. Thank you so much. And I think I'll just leave now. So good night, good morning, and I'll see you on the next video, which hopefully will be Friday. You know, if I can make it, I can do it, guys.